Hey YouTube, welcome back to the Force Feed. We are still talking about the Cestus Deception, and now you're about to find out the things that I found interesting about this book. Keep in mind, these are my opinions, and if I get anything wrong, make sure to let me know in the comments below. Chancellor Palpatine and Obi Wan were talking about Count Dooku in a part of the book where they were discussing how he's been able to amass the resources that he's been able to with the Separatists, and Obi Wan looks at Chancellor Palpatine and says, does Count Dooku really have access to such wealth? His surprise at this idea, or this fact really, is really interesting to me because he's Count Dooku and he's from the planet of Serrano, which notably has a lot of money, and their family has a lot of money, and he comes from that family. Comes from the wealthy. So the fact that he comes from that, and he's the leader of the Separatist army, so he's basically the CEO of the Separatist army, why wouldn't he have access to such wealth, Obi-Wan? Why? There's a medicine they talk about in the book that one of the clone troopers was treated with, and it was a bunch of leaves that one of the X-Ting, the species of Cestus, was using, and the leaves covered his body when he was bruised and banged up, and eventually after the leaves had done their work, he was able to peel them off and his skin was basically just glossy and brand new. And he found it really interesting because they use what's called synth flesh when they're out in the battlefield. Bacta, I believe, works much too slowly because you have to submerge yourself in it, where they're able to use synth flesh, which is a quicker way of healing while they're out in the field. And his thought was that, wow, this heals way better than synth flesh does. If they could use this and just wrap themselves in it while they're out in the field, that would do the trick. So I'm not sure if this is mentioned in any other book. I don't believe I saw the name of the medicine. He just said it was a bunch of leaves, but an interesting concept in and of itself anyway. I mentioned this during my overview, but Obi-Wan pulls off a very deceitful thing in this book, and it was very out of character for him because Obi-Wan is typically very by the book, and he's very loyal to the Republic, and he's loyal to the Jedi Council as well. So when he worked with Kit Fisto to create a little act to play out a scenario where he was protecting the 5 families of Cestus from Kit Fisto, who was pretending to be part of the Separatists, I kind of scratched my head. Is this really how you want to go about convincing them to side with the Republic, by lying to them? And then when it blows up in your face, now you can't be trusted, but magically Cestus figures out that you had well-meaning and that you should be trusted afterwards, which I also thought was kind of weird. But Obi-Wan the Deceiver, I did not see that coming. Jango Fett is referenced back to a lot in this book, and one of the main clone characters that you follow in this book, named Jango Tat, or actually I believe his name was A813 or A892 or something like that, can't remember his clone name. He strikes a relationship with Sheikah Toll, who was the former girlfriend, I believe, of Jango Fett. I don't know if they were considered married, if that's even a thing, but they were partners. And a lot has talked about how ruthless Jango Fett was, and we know how good of a warrior he was, and all the clone troopers also know how good of a warrior he was, even despite his actions and what he was capable of. The fact that he had a girlfriend just really reminds you that no matter how terrible somebody might seem, there are other people that care about those people. There are some people we meet in Star Wars where we don't think that to be true. In various points, it doesn't seem like anybody cares about Darth Vader, and plenty of other people, Moff Tarkin, things like that. But it's easy to forget that even the hard people like Jango Fett had people that cared about them. Jango Tat, one of the clones that you follow in the book, roughly describes the training that they received on Vandor 3, I think it was, as rigorous. They had very rigorous training, and there are clones that get weeded out that do not make the cut. But he also says that the clones that do make it, different clones tend to develop different traits, and they end up receiving specialized training in the things that they are best at. He went on to say that not all clones receive the same training. They all receive different training based on what their strengths are, and I guess the cloning process brings that out in certain clones, that they end up having different strengths. You kind of see this with Clone Force 99, since they were the extreme versions of 5 different clones that each had extremely big strengths of their own, were less well-rounded and very specialized in certain areas. Jango Tat, or as he was originally called, Nate, was challenged by Sheikah Toll, who was the former girlfriend of Jango Fett, to display personality, and the way that she tries to get it out of him is by going through scenarios that he might automatically respond with some sort of a military response. I want you to think about something without thinking about how you would approach it militarily, and that was very difficult for him to do, whether it be describing the sky or when you enter a field, how do you feel about what you see, things like that. And he would always come up with something that made him prepared for the moment, as if he's going to go into battle, because that's all he's ever known. That's all any of the clone troopers have ever known. So in that sense, nearly all of the clone troopers lacked a sense of personality, even though you really saw personalities brought out in in the Clone Wars and things like that. As a general rule, I believe many of the clones just lacked a certain amount of personality due to them only thinking militarily. And when you see that personality come out in Nate, later called Jango Tat, it's actually a very special thing to read. One of the 5 family members' name was Trillet, and Trillet was of the X-Ting species, much like a lot of the original people of Cestus. The X-Ting go through kind of like a natural gender change depending on the season. It's described that they go through this, I think it's like an 8-week ordeal where they change from male to female, and then there's another period in which they change from female back to male. And some X-Ting have certain medicines that allow them to have this change happen much faster to avoid the long drawn out changing process. So it was kind of a weird gender fluidity that was introduced into this book. It was written in 2004, so definitely out of the current event talks about things surrounding gender and sex. This was just an interesting concept to bring into this story. Jango Tat brought out the very real confession of how clones depart each other when they leave, no matter what the situation is, whether they are departing each other to go on a mission or to go back to base, whatever ends up being. When they leave each other, they don't say good luck or see you next time. They literally say goodbye to their fellow clones, because the expectation is when they leave each other, they're probably going to be dead before they see each other again, which is a sad realization to come to. It's reminded to you again and again in this book that the clone troopers were bred to die, and to die for the Republic is an honor in their eyes. Obi-Wan actually builds a lightsaber whip, and they call it the light whip in the book, much like the light whip that was introduced in the Acolyte, and I believe it was the same concept. They didn't talk about kyber crystals or anything like that, but I believe it was a lightsaber whip. It felt like it was described in that way. However, when they stored this light whip, they described it being coiled up and then hooked onto their belt. So it's very possible that this wasn't a traditional lightsaber whip, but more of a energy whip that Obi-Wan had created for certain situations that might call for it. Asajj Ventress was discussed as being discovered on the planet Ratatak in this book, and I was skeptical of this being a canon fact because we know that Asajj Ventress was actually a Dathomirian Night Sister who left Dathomir to study under Count Dooku and become a Sith Lord. So it really furthers the chances of this book being brought into canon, even though it's a very obscure story. Most of these small stories don't have really a point in being brought into canon. They're just for fun. But it's always interesting when you read about a character that you know of their origins and then a different origin comes up for them. And it's possible when they said discovered on Ratatak, maybe that's where she moved to at some point, or where they thought she moved to, and then that's where Dooku discovered her. But as far as we know, she was discovered on Dathomir. Kit Fisto was addressing the clones when they were about to strike a lot of the warehouses and buildings on Cestus, when they were attacking their water center and their energy center and things like that to get their attention. And before they went on this mission, Kit Fisto was giving a sort of motivational speech to the clones, and when he was talking to them, he said, "You guys need to make sure to be watertight." I thought that was an interesting turn of phrase to use, because usually the expression is things need to be airtight. Given that the clones are from Kamino, and then Kamino is a water planet, it felt like a reference to something that they'd be more familiar with, that something needs to be watertight. Just something I picked up on and that I thought was kind of funny. That's the end of the things that I found interesting in this book. Don't forget, there is a link to purchase this book at the bottom in the description, as well as the next 3 books that I'll be reading on this channel. And stay tuned for the next video where I will discuss a recap of the book and my final rating. Thanks and have a great day.